Winston S. Churchill, The World Crisis, Volume 1, Appendix E, First Lord's Minutes. Formation of the Royal Naval Division, to Secretary, First Sea Lord, and Second Sea Lord. In order to make the best possible use of the surplus naval reservists of different classes, it is proposed to constitute permanent cadres of 1 marine and 2 naval brigades. The Marine Brigade has already been partially formed in 4 battalions, aggregating 1,880 active servicemen. To this will be added an approximately equal number of reservists, making the total strength of the brigade 3,900, organized in 4 battalions of 4 double companies of approximately 250 men. The 2 naval brigades will also consist of 4 battalions, each, if possible, of 880 men, organized in 16 double companies of 220. The composition of each battalion should be as follows: RNVR 375, RFR picked under 30 years of age 313, RNR 190. The total numbers required for the 2 naval brigades would therefore be RNVR 3000, RFR 2500, RNR 1500. The Marine Brigade will be commanded by a colonel, and each battalion by a lieutenant colonel, each company by a major and a captain. The means of remedying the shortage of junior officers will be dealt with separately. About 50 new subalterns, Royal Marines, must be entered either permanently or on a 3 years or till the war stops engagement. Each naval brigade will be commanded by a captain, Royal Navy, 5 of the battalions by a commander or naval officer promoted to the rank, and 3 by RNVR commanders. Each company will be commanded by a lieutenant commander, RN or RNVR, or, if these are not forthcoming, by a major Royal Marines. The question of making good deficiencies in these and in the Marine Brigade will be dealt with separately. There are, however, available 50 RNVR lieutenants, 66 sub-lieutenants, and 12 midshipmen, total 128. About 50 more officers would be required. The use of these brigades need not to be considered until the organization has advanced sufficiently to allow of their military value to be judged. The formation of these brigades should be completed so far as resources allow in the present week. The officers commanding the companies and battalions must be appointed forthwith. The first essential is to get the men drilling together in brigades, and the deficiencies of various ranks in the battalion can be filled up later. It may ultimately be found possible in the course of the war to build up all battalions of the Marine and Naval Brigades to the Army strength of 1,070, and the organization will readily adapt itself to this. All the men, whether sailors or marines, while training in the 3 brigades, will be available if required for service afloat, and it must be distinctly understood that this is the paramount claim upon them. But in the meanwhile they will be left to be organized for land service. August 16, 1914. Winston S. Churchill. Action of August 28. To Secretary, First Sea Lord, Third Sea Lord, Director of Naval Ordnance. First, let me have an estimate of how long it will take to refit for service in every particular the vessels damaged in the recent action. Careful attention should be paid to the wishes and suggestions of the officers who fought them, in order that everything possible can be done to increase their fighting efficiency. Second, the failure of the 4-inch guns in the Arethusa is most serious and must be thoroughly investigated. I am informed that it arose both from the breaking of the ejector catches, of which there were no spares, and secondly from the coating of the cartridge cases, which gradually fouled the gun. At one critical moment only one 4-inch gun could fire, and but for her 6-inch guns the Arethusa would have been destroyed. I wish to receive a statement showing that an effective remedy has been provided. Third, every effort should be made while the ships are refitting to give the officers and men a few days' leave. The nervous strain of a modern action is considerable, and a change of scene is required to restore poise and resilience. August 30, 1914. Winston S. Churchill. To Secretary, First Sea Lord, Chief of Staff. First, selections might be made from all the reports of this action, beginning with some of the submarine reconnaissance reports which the Prime Minister has repeatedly urged me to publish. All interesting matter which can be made public without detriment to the future should be collected, circulated to the fleet, and published in the newspapers. Second, the criticism in the Commander-in-Chief's report and various references to discrepancies in the arrangements which occur in Commodore S's and other statements must all be kept absolutely secret. Mistakes are always made in war, but there is no need to weaken confidence by dwelling on them after success has been obtained. The senior officers concerned in the maneuver should, however, all have the opportunity of studying the full reports in order that every effort may be made to improve arrangements in the future. Beyond this profoundly secret circle, no whisper must go. Third, I am awaiting your recommendations for honors, promotions, and rewards to be accorded to the officers and men who distinguished themselves in this fortunate and skillful enterprise. September 6, 1914, Winston S. Churchill. Separation allowances for the Navy. To Financial Secretary. I have today obtained the assent of the Cabinet in principle to the granting of a separation allowance to the whole Navy at once. The scale should be the full Army scale less any deductions which should be made on account of higher pay and allowances the sailor may receive as compared with the soldier. These details are to be settled between the Admiralty and the Treasury. I regard the matter as one of prime importance and urgency. It is of course understood that the present decision only authorizes the payment of a separation allowance during the period of active service, and that the question of what is to happen in time of peace is not prejudiced. I wish you to take up this question in conjunction with the Accountant General and the Naval Branch, and make me your proposals in the course of tomorrow. It will be of a great fillip to our sailors when this boon to them is announced to the fleet, as I hope it may be in the next few days. Pray press it forward by every means in your power, acting with the Treasury and calling me in where there is a hitch or difficulty. September 4, 1914. Winston S. Churchill. To Financial Secretary. The Cabinet decided that evidence of allotment regularly made should decide whether the separation allowance should be paid or not, and that legal marriage is not indispensable. Where it is clear that the woman has been dependent on the man, and the man has recognized this tie by a regular allotment, the legality of the marriage will be assumed. September 19, 1914. Winston S. Churchill. Enemy reservists. To Secretary. Please inquire who was responsible for allowing a merchant ship from Buenos Aires with 400 German reservists on board to pass Gibraltar and to convey them to Italian ports, whence they left to join their units. How was it that these men were not arrested and made prisoners of war when passing the Straits? September 5, 1914, Winston S. Churchill. Life belts. To Secretary, 1st Sea Lord, 4th Sea Lord, Chief of Staff. The sinking of the Pathfinder shows how important it is that there should be more life belts or life buoys available on our ships. Many lives would have been saved in this case if such steps had been taken. I don't like the German system of going into action with life belts on, but there certainly ought to be in the boats and on the deck of British ships something like 100 life belts or life buoys, which could be seized and would float overboard if the vessel foundered. Pray let me have a proposal. September 10, 1914, Winston S. Churchill. Submarine honors. To Secretary, Naval Secretary, 1st Sea Lord. Since it is difficult to choose which man in a submarine has done specially well, it is necessary that the decoration should be given to the boat, and that the men should ballot among themselves to decide who is to have it. September 17, 1914, Winston S. Churchill. Blockade. To Secretary, 1st Sea Lord, Additional Civil Lord, ACL, and Chief of the Staff and others. A Standing Admiralty Committee will be formed under the presidency of the Additional Civil Lord, to be called the Restriction of Enemies Supplies Committee, composed as follows: 1 representative of the Trade Division of the War Staff, 1 representative of the Foreign Office, 1 representative of the Board of Trade, Mr. Alan Burgoyne, MP, Mr. C. Money, MP. The duties of this committee will be to examine and watch continually all means or routes by which supplies of food or raw material may reach Germany and Austria, to report weekly all importations or exportations to and from these countries coming to their knowledge, and to recommend by what methods, financial, commercial, diplomatic, and military, they may be hampered, restricted, and, if possible, stopped. Measures should, in the first instance, be recommended to secure full and accurate information from day to day of all vessels unloading cargoes which may ultimately reach Germany or Austria at neutral ports, and the port of Rotterdam especially, as well as the possibility of supplies coming through a northern part of Sweden or from Sweden itself across the Baltic, or through Norway and Denmark. Holland must be the subject of the closest study, it being clearly impossible for the British government to allow the neutral port of Rotterdam to serve as a base of supplies to the enemy. Trustworthy agents in Holland must be obtained or dispatched thither for this purpose. Any possible importation overland through Italy or up the Adriatic must be included in the survey. Funds will be forthcoming for any special action required. The committee should hold its first meeting on Friday the 14th, using a committee room at the Admiralty. ACL to nominate his own secretary and make all further arrangements to carry this minute into effect. August 13, 1914, Winston S. Churchill. Munitions. To Lord Kitchener. Captain Hankey of the Committee of Imperial Defence has been to me what seems rather a good idea. He suggests that Durat should be put at the head of an emergency armament multiplication committee or department, to set on foot and develop the maximum possible output of guns, rifles, ammunition, etc. I am sure, myself, that more could be done by the firms than is being done at present. For instance, after you told me of the pressure you had put upon them, and that their complete limits has been reached, Our people went round and obtained undertakings from the trade to produce 700 rifles a week more, additional to all that had been ordered by you. This is only a half-formed idea, and I pass it on to you not as a recommendation, but simply for what it is worth. September 3, 1914. Winston S. Churchill. United States Neutrality. To Sir Edward Grey. Please see attached, which is not printed. I should be so glad if you could see your way to making a strong stand against this. Even if we ultimately have to give way, the fact that they will have overruled our protests will, in the existing balance of public opinion in the United States, make them desirous of being helpful, or at any rate not unfriendly, on other points at issue. Our case is clear. The Germans have announced their intention, have endeavored on a large scale, and have partially begun to arm merchant ships as commerce destroyers, and they even claim to carry out this process of arming and equipping in neutral harbors or on the high seas. We have been forced, in consequence of this, to arm a number of our ships in self-defense. In doing this, we follow the undoubted law of the seas as it was practiced in all the great wars of the past. We claim that by international law a merchant ship armed in her own defense, so long as she takes no aggressive action, is entitled to the full status of a peaceful trading ship. We ask that our ships so armed for this purpose shall be accorded that status in the neutral ports of the world. We are quite willing to agree that German merchant ships similarly armed in self-defense shall be similarly treated. It is only when merchant ships are armed and commissioned as auxiliary cruisers, not for purposes of self-defense, but for those of commerce destruction, that we claim they should be treated as ships of war. And here again we ask no better treatment for ourselves than for the enemy. We recognize the natural difficulty to a neutral state, anxious to preserve a strict impartiality of discerning whether ships carrying the same armament are intended for offensive or defensive action. We offer that this question should be decided by a simple and practical test. If the armed merchant ship is engaged in ordinary commerce, discharging and taking a regular cargo and embarking passengers in the usual way, she should be counted as a trader in spite of her armament. If, on the other hand, she is not engaged in commerce, is not doing the ordinary things she would do and has done in time of peace, but is either carrying special cargoes of coal and stores to belligerent cruisers on the high seas, or is traveling in ballast, or is not trafficking in her cargo in the natural way, then we say she should be treated as a ship of war, even if the government of the state whose flag she flies declares that she is only armed and will only fight in self-defense. We must therefore hold a neutral government impeccable if she allows a German armed merchantman, which takes a regular cargo in the ordinary way, to arm in her ports or leave them for the high seas, even if subsequently that vessel engages not merely in self-defense, but in actual aggressive attack. Neutrals will deal with ships according to the cargo test, must be held blameless by us, whatever the subsequent careers of the vessels may be. The issues which remain open after these ships have put to sea can only be decided between the belligerents. The second point that I hope you will be able to fight is no transference after the declaration of war of enemy's ships to a neutral flag as agreed upon in the Declaration of London. We cannot recognize such transferences. which are plainly, in the nature of things, designed to enable the transferred ship to obtain under a neutral flag an immunity from the conditions created by the war. I would earnestly ask that both these points should be pressed now in the most direct and formal manner on powers concerned, and particularly upon the United States, and that very great pressure should be exerted. In this connection it may be pointed out that the United States have already allowed one or more ships, including the Kronprinz Wilhelm, to leave their ports armed, denuded of cargo and cleared for action, and that to stop British ships of a self-defensive character is showing a partiality to one of the belligerents incompatible with fair and loyal neutrality. If to this is to be added the attempt which Mr. Bryan has made by his personal intervention to take over the Hamburg American liners from Germany and run them under the American flag, it seems to me clear that a situation has arisen which, in the ultimate issues, ought in some form or other to be brought publicly before the people of the United States. I am under no illusions as to their attitude, but the forces at work there in the present circumstances are such as to make it impossible for any government to load the dice against England, or go openly 1 inch beyond an even neutrality. I venture to suggest to you that this position ought to be fought up to the point of full publicity, and by every means and influence at our disposal, before we are forced to consider the various inferior alternatives which no doubt exist. August 19, 1914. Winston S. Churchill. To Secretary, First Sea Lord, Admiral Slade, Chief of Staff, and Captain Webb. The Cabinet decided this morning that we must abandon, under protest and as an exception, the running of defensively armed merchantmen to American ports. We do this on the assumption that we in no way waive the principle, but in consideration of the fact that the United States are preventing a large number of German ships suitable for armament from fitting out. We must also stipulate that the guns, having been landed from these ships, shall be returned without their mountings in some other non-military vessel on which and from which they clearly cannot be used during the voyage. Pray draft a note to the Foreign Office accordingly. September 3, 1914. Winston S. Churchill. The British Patrol off New York. To Secretary, First Sea Lord, Chief of Staff, and Admiral Slade. I have felt uncomfortable about this for some time. Although it is strictly legal, it must be very galling to the Americans to see their capital port picketed in this way. Instructions should be given that the patrolling cruisers should usually keep 8 or 10 miles away, or even farther if possible, and should only close in occasionally when there is some special need. They should, above all, be careful never to infringe the 3-mile limit, and should discharge their duties with tact, remembering how greatly British interests are concerned in the maintenance of good relations with the United States. On the other hand, the closest watch should be kept on shore upon the Hamburg American liners, and our cruisers should be given the earliest warning if these are seen to be getting up steam. It ought to be quite easy to give our cruisers full warning of any movement. The prevention of these Hamburg American liners leaving armed and fueled is practically the whole duty of our vessels off New York. And as long as they are in a position to discharge this, they need not to be too obtrusive in their other duties. October 26, 1914. Winston S. Churchill. Anti-submarine measures. Dover. To First Sea Lord and others. It is intolerable that we should be told that Dover is not safe against submarine attack. It is the only military harbor we have except Portland. We must be able to keep ships there safely. Measures are being taken to close one of the entrances by sinking 2 ships. This is urgent and vital, and should be pressed forward from hour to hour without a moment's pause. The other entrance should have an anti-submarine net and gate arranged. If the boom defense has carried away, it must be repaired and replaced by night and day exertions. Meanwhile, the long barges fitted with nets, which have been prepared at Dunkirk, should be brought over as soon as the weather allows, and used either to block the entrance or to give net protection to ships lying inside. November 1, 1914. Winston S. Churchill. High explosive production. To ACL. You must act in this matter and refer to me only when special need arises. The points to be held in view are clear and simple. First, we must have effective government control of all the explosive works, so as to attain the maximum output and ensure our not being hampered by German influences, which are powerful and subtle in the explosive trust. Second, naval interests must be properly safeguarded, and this can only be either by the Navy taking nobles and the other 2 companies, or by an absolutely equal representation and control as between the 2 departments, that is, the Admiralty and War Office, over the whole of the explosive factories combined. We cannot be placed in the position of being overborne by the military authorities and having our necessary demands set aside. Third, it is, however, our duty to do everything in our power to aid in the expansion of the army and the production of war material for the conduct of the campaign, and at a certain point only state policy can decide whether naval or military interests are to claim priority. Fourth, we must make good bargain for the country. And if these people are financed by government money to set up great new works and broaden the scale of their business, good arrangements should be made to transfer these works to the government at the end of the war. November 9, 1914. Winston S. Churchill. The Dummy Fleet. Most secret. To Secretary, 1st Sea Lord, 3rd Sea Lord, Director of Naval Construction and Naval Secretary. It is necessary to construct without delay a dummy fleet. 10 merchant vessels, either German prizes or British ships, should be selected at once. They should be distributed among various private yards not specially burdened with warship building at the present time. They are then to be mocked up to represent particular battleships of the 1st and 2nd battle squadrons. The actual size need not correspond exactly, as it is notoriously difficult to judge the size of vessels at sea, and frequently even destroyers are mistaken for cruisers. We are bearing in mind particularly aerial and periscope observations, where deception is much more easy. It is not necessary that the structures should be strong enough to stand rough weather. Very little metal would be required, and practically the whole work should be executed in wood or canvas. The ships would move under their own power, under favorable conditions of weather, from one base to another, and even when the enemy knows that we have such a fleet, its presence will tend to mystify and confuse his plans and baffle and distract the enterprise of his submarines. He will always be in doubt as to which is the real and which is the dummy fleet. An attack upon the dummy fleet can be made not less dangerous than an attack upon the real fleet by the proper use of our own submarines and destroyers with towing charges, and possibly by traps of nets and mines. The matter is urgent. 3 years ago I formed this idea, and deeply regret that I have been so long deterred from putting it into execution. The Third Sea Lord, Fourth Sea Lord, and Naval Secretary will meet today under the Third Sea Lord and formulate detailed proposals for immediate action. The utmost secrecy must be observed, and special measures taken to banish all foreigners from the districts where the mocking up is being done. I should hope to receive the list of ships which are selected for conversion tomorrow morning, and the list of firms among whom the work will be parceled out during the course of that day. Estimates of cost and time should also be made, but paint, canvas, and woodwork can be quickly done, and I should expect in a fortnight, or at the outside in 3 weeks, that 10 vessels will be actually at our tactical disposal. October 21, 1914. Winston S. Churchill. The Coastal Patrol. Secret. To First Sea Lord. If the system of working the patrol flotillas explained in the enclosed memorandum has actually been enforced, it is in complete violation not only of the obvious principles of war, but of all the orders and directions issued in this subject during the last 3 years. The word distribution applied to armed force implies the most vicious ideas. To proceed by dividing the front to be watched by the number of destroyers available for watching and working out the number of miles the destroyers is the negation of good sense and military principle. Ever since the maneuvers of 1912, I have repeatedly explained the principles which should govern the working of the patrol flotillas, see attached papers, and these have been expounded to the CID, and issued to the War Staff with the full concurrence of the First Sea Lord and the COS. If there has been a departure from these principles and an adoption of the barbarous method of distributing the destroyers along the whole coast in a single row like toy soldiers on the kitchen table, this shows a total lack of comprehension. It must again be repeated. First, that the coast, with its cyclists, signal stations, and watchers, is the line of observation, and the only line of observation, which can certainly report the arrival of an enemy. Second, that the patrol flotillas both of submarines and destroyers, instead of being frittered away on useless cordon and patrolling duties, should be kept concentrated and ready for action at selected sally ports along the coast, ready to proceed in force to any point where shore information shows that an enemy is attempting to land. Third, that there is to be nothing like routine or sentry-go patrolling, except at the mouths of harbors, and that from time to time occasional good bold reconnaissances 60, 70, and 80 miles out to seaward should be pushed from each sally port by the whole of the boats available, varied occasionally by the prying scouting of a single destroyer. Fourth, that the prevention of mine-laying can only be done by trawlers, who must summon help from the nearest patrol center if necessary. It must be recognized that nothing in our dispositions prevents an enemy from approaching the British coasts with transports and beginning a landing there, but that, if the flotillas are properly handled, he should be attacked within a few hours by submarines and destroyers, and that the numbers and strength of the forces against him should continually increase until long before any considerable force can be landed, the enemy's transports and escort will be overwhelmed, and those who are landed hopelessly cut off. The only alternative to this policy of letting the enemy begin to land and then attacking him while his landing is in progress is the close blockade of the Heligoland Bight. There is much to be said for and against both courses, but the immediate course of distributing a weak and thin cordon of patrols at a short distance from the coast in the hopes of putting up some defensive shield or screen is utterly futile. The policy at present approved is to concentrate the flotillas at fixed points and keep them strong and fresh and fit for action, while relying upon the coast watch to give early and accurate information of any attack by the enemy. If this policy be adhered to strictly and simply, it will not be found impossible to spare the 12 destroyers which the Commander-in-Chief needs. It is, however, to be considered whether they could not better be taken from the 2 First Fleet flotillas at Harwich. November 7, 1914. Winston S. Churchill. The rifle shortage. The following course is to be adopted. First, as soon as the War Office are ready to hand over the 50,000 Japanese rifles, the whole of the rifles, long and short, whether used by sailors or marines, on board Her Majesty's ships, at home and abroad, will be collected and brought on shore to the Royal Naval Ordnance Depots. The Japanese rifles will be issued to all ships in their place. There will be no rifles of any sort on board Her Majesty's ships other than Japanese. Second, from the British rifles surrendered by the fleet, 15,000 short .303 Charger loading rifles will be set aside for the Royal Naval Division, that is, 1 rifle for each of 12,000 men, plus 25% for reserve and training. All the rifles now possessed by the Royal Naval Division will then be surrendered to the ordnance depots in exchange for the 15,000 short .303 British rifles aforesaid. Therefore, the Royal Naval Division will have 15,000 short British .303 and no more. Third, there will then be handed over to the Army 57,800 rifles, of which 9,000 will be short charger loading. Fourth, the 50,000 Japanese rifles will be issued to the fleet in the following proportion: 1 rifle for each marine, and 1 rifle for every 5 sailors. Ships on foreign service receiving 1 rifle for every 3 sailors. The rest of the rifles will be issued as required to trawlers and auxiliaries and kept in the Royal Marine and Royal Naval Ordnance Depots. The fleet will thus be completely rearmed with the 50,000 Japanese rifles and the Royal Naval Division with .303 short rifles ready for field service. Let me now have calculations worked out on this basis and draft a letter accordingly to the War Office. November 25, 1914. Winston S. Churchill.